Welcome to the Old Mac Gang podcast, or OMG, if you want to call it that. It's a vodcast with a panel of longtime Mac Apple users who want to discuss the most relevant apps and services to age-seasoned users. I'm Marty Jencius, an Apple enthusiast and podcaster. I am 67 years old, age-seasoned, if you want to call it that. And I've been collecting a great group of friends to talk about Apple and ways in which seasoned citizens can use Apple products and apps. Today, we have a full panel of regulars. We're going to not have all these people all the time, but it's nice to have a good set of regulars to kick off the first episode. So let's just go around and get names, locations, and if you're willing, share your age.
I'm Peter,
Hi.
and I'm from Bay Village, Ohio. I'm 72.
Hi, I'm Bob from Tucson. I'm 72, and I've been a Mac user for at least 30 years. This is where you're all supposed to go, hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Do we all drink too, like the old Bob Newhart?
Yeah.
So my name is Chris, and I'm also from Tucson, and I'm 77, and I started with the Mac in 1984. So, and I can get into further details as and when appropriate. But
I'm Gary, and I didn't realize I was 20. I knew I was older than Marty and Peter, but I didn't realize I was 20 years older than Marty. I'm 87. I got involved with Macs about 20 years ago when I retired and came back to Cleveland, and I'm a hanger-oner.
Yeah, and the connection of all of you are through, you're all in Mac user groups. Gary and Peter are in the one that's closest to me, and Bob and Chris are in Tucson. And we're all familiar with Mac user groups, older users who are part of that group and the types of questions and ideas that they have that they're interested in. So I'm going to ask a first question. We'll go around. And I'll send it to Bob first. Talk about your current engagement with Apple products, your user group, other products and services that you use.
I have a wide range of Apple products. I currently have a Mac desktop, a Mac laptop, both M series, and a watch, a phone, Apple TV, almost everything except a Vision Pro. I am an officer of the Tucson Macintosh user group. I've been involved in user groups since before I moved to Tucson, starting in DoubleClick, the Macintosh user group of Milwaukee, and then having been an officer there when I fled the upper Midwest to the sun of Arizona, I found the Tucson Macintosh user group and have been an officer there as well.
Peter?
Yeah, I'm all in on the Apple Echoverse, and I'm also not. I haven't bellied up to the bar for a Vision Pro yet. But essentially, most of my electronic gear, with one exception, is part of Apple's offerings. I have a MacBook Pro 16-inch M1 Max. I have an iPad Pro 13-inch M4. I have an iPhone 16 Pro Max. I have an Apple Watch Series 9. I have AirPods Pro 2. And an Apple TV. I use every one of those every day. And my only non-Apple device that I use virtually every day, maybe not quite every day, probably 6 out of 7, is a Kindle Scribe. I'm probably the newbie to Macs in this group from what I just heard. I think I'm coming up on year 20 of being an Apple person. I was in a CPM users group. I was in a IBM PC users group. And once I made the leap to Apple, I have participated in Apple user groups. I think I love user groups for helping me get the most out of my gizmos and gadgets.
okay. Well, I started out in, in January 1984. I'd just come back from visiting friends in Florida, and they had an Apple II for their kids. And I thought, well, I've got to do something for my kids. So I got them the Apple IIe. And then, of course, then the Mac came out, right, the following month. And I thought, oh, man, what am I going to do here? So I kind of played it low key, although I was constantly reading everything I could subconsciously about the Mac. And then when the test drive came around, that some of you may have heard of in November of '84, I took one home and had the thing set up on my dining room table. And somewhere around 10:30 at night, I double clicked on this file, which was a basic program that played Beethoven's Für Elisa. And, or it was Moonlight Sonata. I'm not sure they were both on there. I forget which one. And I was just astonished to hear music coming out of the computer. And my first thought was, this changes everything. My second thought was, I wonder what the Beatles are going to think about this. And that's another whole thing. But I joined Apple Corps Dallas with the Apple IIe, and they were way over my head talking about programming the Apple IIe. And then later, I came back for the Mac and was involved with that user group. And the Apple, the Mac Pack was in Richardson. So there were two user groups in Dallas. And then I went to work for Apple with System 7 in Austin. And I was a member there with Bob Levitas and a few others in the Capital Macintosh group. And then pretty much took a break during my Apple years. From 93 to 2001, and then ended up leaving Apple and going to work for Stanford and worked there for 15 years. I did attend the Homebrew Stanford group there at the Stanford Linear Accelerator, but again, these guys were like super way technical. And so we retired and moved down here in 2018. And I was on jury duty, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "I like your watch." And I looked down at his wrist, and it's the identical watch that I had on. And that's how I met Bob. And it managed to get me out of jury duty because we weren't supposed to be talking. So that was sort of my exit ticket out of there. But Bob eventually, wrestled me into joining the TMUG group here, Tucson Macintosh User Group here. And I love it because, we've got some people that can kind of keep me in touch with stuff, and I always learn something new every time. And as far as Macs, I'm using the M1 Mac Mini that I got back in 21. And I have an old laptop, but I hardly ever use that anymore. And surprisingly, my number one device is actually, which works for everything, right? And who knew? I can tell you a funny story about that too, but it's the new 16 Pro Max. And I have an iPad that's ninth generation, the entry level, that I use that sometimes. And I do have some AirPod Pros, the original ones. And, that's all I use really. The M1 is such a workhorse. And between that and the phone, it's amazing what I can get done. And so that's been my primary focus. And again, I've always been sort of a fan of user groups, and it's just so I always learn stuff and make good friendships. So it's been a lot of fun.
Gary.
Yeah, that is so true, Bob. Make users groups and make good friends, and that's so true for all of us, which is nice that we're learning and together. As I said, when I always learn too with groups and who's in the groups. And when I worked I took a job transfer from Cleveland with the DOD. I was an auditor to Virginia. So the government at that time was all on PCs. But I knew when I retired then 20 years ago, although quickly before that, I was in Oberlin, Ohio. Oh, I had an Osborne. That was my first computer. And the government had these luggable compacts and things like that. So, but there wasn't but when I came back, I knew there was probably a users group in Cleveland for Apple. I'm not sure why, because there wasn't one. And there were two at the time. And even this current one we're in now has been struggling with getting members. But I too, like Bob, as I said, I'm retired. I have my primary computer, because I'm home, is a Mac Mini also, that I can run 3 monitors on it. And I don't always use the third one, but I like space. And as I said, I'm a retired accountant, and I'm the treasurer of a couple organizations that keep me going. So that's my main, and my phone, as you said, that is the two primary tools that I use. And also, though, I have a MacBook Air, I have a watch, and an Apple TV, and earbuds. So I have most everything, and I'm going now primarily with Apple because I can't try to learn not going back to the PC. So that's it, Marty.
Well, just for myself, I became an Apple user in about 2006. I was doing podcasts on PCs, and I heard about MacBook or it might have been a version, Gbook, something like that I was using or was going to use, because at that time you could do podcasts that they called enhanced podcasts, which would allow you to put graphics in them. So they would show up on iPods and show up on other devices as the audio played. And as an educator, I thought, this is really cool. I want to get into this. So someone loaned me this laptop, and I created a enhanced, or what they called an enhanced version of the podcast. And then started using Macs pretty regularly at that point in 2006. So, Peter, I'm not too far away from when you got into the ecosystem and you got involved too. I have a bad habit, which is I really like new Apple products. So I've stopped buying them, and I tell myself what I'm doing is leasing them. And, I get the new model, and then the newer model comes out, and I trade in the older model and add the difference for the newer model, and then I'm there till the next model. So there's not a device right now that I have that's not up to date, including this last week getting the new Mini, and then today purchasing an M4 MacBook Pro Max, I guess, or an M4 Max. So I'll be trading in my old laptops and my old Mini for that purpose when those new ones come. I have a Apple Vision Pro. I do a podcast on Apple Vision Pro called Vision Profiles. And for me, this is another one of those kinds of podcasts that we're doing, because we're really looking, and we're in our Apple user groups, we're surrounded by people who are post-retirement and have questions and have needs that I think are a lot different than younger users. And in particular, there are certain apps and accessibility things that older users are more interested in if they can get access to it. So I'm hoping this podcast will kind of fill that niche with ideas that you might have for upcoming shows or upcoming topics. So that's my second question, and I'll start with Chris. What ideas or topics do you have for future episodes?
Marty, I think that's a good segue. When you were saying that, I was thinking about my hearing aids, because I'm on my third set of hearing aids that I've been wearing for, probably 15 years now. And, that's why I use these wired earbuds, because they, unlike the AirPod Pros, they don't have the ear tips. Yeah. And so they just slip right on top, and I can piggyback them. And when I first got my hearing aids in 2010, 2011, sometime in that time frame, I always before used the wired earbuds when I talked on the iPhone. And I was doing IT at Stanford for the School of Education. So I needed to, be available by phone. And the phone rang, and I thought, well, how am I going to answer this? And so the Bluetooth light that went to the hearing aids wasn't that good back then. In fact, as a matter of fact, it didn't exist for the first 2 years. That's right. And came in year 3. And that's why I started piggybacking with these guys. And I've been doing it ever since, and it works fine. And it's a lot more reliable than, you can stream and stuff to hearing aids, but sometimes one side cuts out or the other side cuts out. And there are a lot of good things about it. There's some things that don't work as well, but that's one whole aspect is just,
yeah.
And, when you look at the different areas of accessibility, there are things in there for everybody, really. But it's a bit of a minefield. And Bob and I have a colleague in the user group who we may have mentioned, Melissa Davis, and she works a lot with older folks and accessibilities, because you can get in trouble with it. But anyway, well, that's probably enough for now. But I think there are a lot of areas that we can share info on that might be useful.
Yeah, I think the hearing aid and the new aspect with the new operating system where you can do the hearing test, what's kind of spurred the idea for wanting to do this show, that this is a unique service that Apple's putting together. I took the hearing test. What I'm thinking is we do that maybe as our next show. And we talk about that. Other ideas that you might have, Chris or Peter, we can go to Peter. If Chris, you have any other ideas for episodes?
Well, my other thought is more of a generality that, things appear to be complexifying, and maybe it's just I'm getting older, but, and so a little help making sure that people get dialed in to the right places and get things going. And along this vein, when I heard about all the stuff coming down with iOS 18, I decided to take the leap and join iPhone Life. So I have a subscription to that service, and they have various things, like they've got some classes going on Apple Intelligence and what that means and how it's going to be applied. And once again, it's sort of like a Kelby One, but for Apple users instead of photographers, and been learning some stuff about that too. But that's an area where we might be adding some value for folks.
Yeah, I had three quick ideas, and one of them sort of amplifies what Chris just said. And I think it's, the thing that I thought I expected I'd hear a lot about, and that's features I guess I would classify as health features, certainly hearing, heart, blood things. As we're older, those things concern us more than it might concern some of the younger people. Something unexpected that I'll probably be trying to convince all of you to appreciate is the ways in which recreational mathematics can occur on all of these gizmos. And I'm talking about games and puzzles and art that isn't what you would think of just, leveling up and things like that. And then the last thing, which I guess I would call an other thing, which gives me great joy, which is when I can MacGyver or kludge something into happening that the device was not designed to do. How can I put elements that are presented up to us together in such a way to get something that wasn't maybe expected, and I'm not saying program it by the designers. So those are my topics.
Yeah, I appreciate your, Peter I can't call you a retired math teacher because you're so still involved in state math and development. You got Gary hooked into it. And, Gary, yeah. And so I can appreciate you, you wanting to add that in as a topic. And I know you're a great resource for that. Gary, ideas of topics that you might have?
I like what Bob said about the hearing also, because I've worn hearing aids for quite a while, and the accessibility part of the Apple ecosystem. There's many there. Oh, and what I'm started recently to try to master is dictation, both in Apple Mail and in messages. As I said, I'm home a lot. I've got other things to do, but when I'm on the computer, I do a fair amount of messages and emails. And I'm finding with messages, because as I get older, I'm also not typing, I think, the way I used to, as I'm missing some of the keys. I mean, I know where they are, but I'm finding that if I the dictation down, because it picks up the words, even of course, the spelling, but even understanding what I'm saying. So I look forward to that. And then lastly, this is another plug in a way that Peter turned me on to, is this app called Perplexity, which I've used almost for every question I have now, Peter, even to compare items. I've found it is much quicker, more efficient, and to the point than Google search.
And rounding us out, Bob?
Well, I've got a couple, but first, I need to step up on my soapbox, and I'll try to stay there only for a couple of minutes. And that is about user groups and Apple. Recently, in the last month or so, Apple has decided that they're not going to devote any resources to Macintosh user groups. The last guy who supposedly was the contact between user groups and Apple was doing it pretty much, quote, on his own time. And now he's not doing it at all. And I look back on user groups back in the dark years when you never said Apple without the word troubled or endangered or some other adjectives. And I think that a fair amount of the turnaround, a lot of it was Steve Jobs, but another big portion was user groups, because as user groups, we are the forefront of advocacy for Apple use. And I would like to explore how we can promote user groups and promote and get back to the heyday when we had growing membership and more people coming in all the time. Now, I know that a lot of us have gotten older and some of us have gone away, and kids these days, they're not joiners. Not only user groups are endangered, so are the Shriners and the Moose and the Elk and the other fraternal organizations. Maybe we can Mac user groups a little bit. Stepping off the soapbox. Another thing, one of the presentations that Marty and I saw at MacStock 2024, how to get the most bang for your buck when buying Apple equipment. When do you go in? Do you go into new? Do you go into rebuilt or refurbished Apple products? And how much RAM is right for you? How much hard drive space is right for you, even though it's not a hard drive anymore? I think that would be a good topic for us to try to explore as well. And that's what I've got this time.
Okay, great. I'm going to share a few. Of course, I never do my own thinking. So I ran the question through AI saying, this is the group that we're trying to do. This is the podcast. Can you come up with some topics? And whether we use these or not, I don't know. I found it a little bit interesting. So I think I asked for 18 topics, and this is what it gave me. FaceTime and messages, using Health app, accessibility features, the Photos app, and simplifying use of the Photos app. Siri, probably just triggered a bunch of Siris. Apple security features, Apple TV and podcasts, iCloud storage, Apple Pay, when to upgrade, and is it worth the cost? Apple Watch, iPad for everything, privacy settings, Apple Fitness Plus, and then Apple News, reading on devices, reminders and calendar apps, getting help, the Genius Bar and Apple Support. How do you go and get help? And then HomeKit. Now that is a little bit deeper than I wanted to get, and it kind of strays into some territory. But those are some ideas, and with the ideas from this group, we will try to put together a set of shows, a set of episodes for you. Please share this with your friends and share this with your user groups, and I will try and get the word out. Our show, we're going to try and keep it to 30 minutes or less, and that's going to be the process, so it's digestible pieces for you and for anybody else. And I just would like to thank everybody and for joining tonight. And again, we might even have some more folks join us as panelists, but you're welcome back to come as often as you can. And as long as we have two people to have a conversation, we'll create a show. So, thanks to Bob, Peter, and Chris for joining us tonight. Let's do a wrap for this episode. Again, we aim to record on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find us and watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/@oldmacgang. That is our YouTube site, our channel. And you can watch it live, or you can pick up the videos after that at another time, and you can always get the podcast. We'll use the site to let you know if there are any changes. So if there's a Wednesday we can't do it, or if we shift to another time, go to the site and you'll find us there. You can also find us through thepodtalk.net, which is my website for various podcasts, and we'll get that set up and have a connection to Old Mac Gang on that website with the other podcasts that we're doing. So please share us with your friends in Mac user groups. Our music is from Philip Gross. It's called Marrakesh. Feel like I need to give some kudos to that. It's courtesy of the Free Music Archive. More information about this podcast and others can be found at thepodtalk.net. Thanks to the group again, Gary, Chris, Peter, and Bob, and thank you for being part of the Old Mac Gang. See you next time.